questions that you do have on the U.S. strikes on Iran. If you'd like to still weigh in, you can scan that QR code, send those questions over to us here on Live Now from Fox. In the meantime, we do want to bring in our expert, and that is Ben Cohen with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a friend of the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. As always, we do appreciate it.
Great to be with you again.
Let's start with this. As the White House confirmed on Sunday, the Islamic Republic of Iran's leadership has contacted the U.S. asking for talks, and the list of potential successors to replace Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed on Saturday by an Israeli airstrike, includes his son and former advisors. So a question I think on a lot of people's minds here, Ben, is who will lead Iran? How is this regime change going to work?
Well, I think we first have to clarify whether this is regime change. And listening to what President Trump had to say earlier suggested to me that he is moving in the direction of regime change, which meaning overthrowing the regime, meaning removing the Islamic Republic as the governing authority of Iran and replacing it with something else, hopefully something more democratic and something that will encourage Iran to become an open society. And I think that there are two really key developments over this operation that inform my view. I think, firstly, for the first time since the Islamic Republic was created 47 years ago, Iran doesn't have a supreme leader. They had Ayatollah Khomeini from 1979 until 1989. And when he died, Khamenei, who was assassinated eliminated, I should say, yesterday, very quickly took his place. And now what you're seeing as they try and find a second supreme leader is a crisis of succession. So that's the first point. The second point is to examine how Iran is fighting this war. And I think what's really significant to me is that they no longer have any friends in the region, nor do they seem to care about that. You know, last June, when Israel, and joined by the US, went to war against Iran, the vast bulk of Iranian projectiles were targeted at Israel and to a lesser extent at US interests in the Middle East. Now you're seeing missiles, barrages of missiles ricocheting across the Arab world. I think nearly every Gulf Arab country, with the exception of Oman, which played a mediating role in between the US and Iran, all those states have been struck. So this is the classic behavior of a regime that is on its last legs. And so when you start talking about succession, I think the question is, will it be a figure from within the regime, or is there somebody and some structure outside the regime that could take over here?
And Ben, we're going to have you hang on here, but we do see the First Lady is speaking. Let's just pop over there, see if she is speaking on Iran.
An education in conflict. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, Under-Secretary General of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo.
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of the Secretary General, I want to thank you for your leadership in organizing today's discussion. This debate comes at a moment of exceptional relevance. Today,
all right, Ben, thank you for hanging on. We just wanted to dip in there to see if the First Lady was going to touch on Iran. It does appear that she is not. So let's continue our conversation. We do see now that Hezbollah has become involved, and Hezbollah said in a statement that the strikes were carried out in retaliation for the killing of Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and for repeated Israeli aggressions. But what about other Iranian proxies? When we talk about the Houthi rebels, do you think that we could see them getting involved here as well?
Yes, I do, and I think that the Houthis can play a key role, and and they have been over the last couple of days in shutting down the Straits of Hormuz. That is a crucial stretch of waterway in the Persian Gulf. Something like 20% of the world's oil supplies travels through the Straits of Hormuz, and so I think one of the that Iran will have here will be to make this war as economically painful as they can for the rest of the world. We've already seen a rise in oil prices, and at the same time that they're creating conditions in the Strait of Hormuz that will prevent ships from carrying oil getting through. They're also targeting energy infrastructure in the region around them. You know, oil refinery in Saudi Arabia was struck today. Some of Qatar's liquefied natural gas assets were also struck. So it's very clear that there's a strong energy dimension to this. And given that the oil and energy resources are spread around the region, it makes sense that these proxies would get involved in helping their paymasters in Tehran.
Ben, we always ask our viewers to write in questions here, and we wanted to get a couple answered here with you live on air. Thank you to our viewers who have written in. And this question, Ben, coming up quite a lot for us here. People are concerned, how vulnerable is the U.S. to retaliatory cyber attacks targeting power grids, financial systems, water systems? What should people really be looking out for?
I think that the US is always vulnerable to cyber attacks, and not just from Iran. You know, we've seen this, Russia and China in particular engaging in trying to engage in systemic degradation through cyber attacks. So I think that this is a pertinent concern with Iran as well, as is the issue of sleeper cells who could potentially carry out terrorist attacks. But I think that we have a robust defense right now of our cyber infrastructure. And I think that any attack would probably have localized effects. In other words, I don't see, you know, the entire grid across the United States being shut down. I don't see multiple airports going down. But I do think in terms of electricity supplies, air traffic control, banking security, identity security, an extra layer of vigilance is certainly needed here.
We had seen President Trump saying to Iran that they had a 10 to 15 day window there to reach that deal. And we had been seeing these talks happening, not much coming out of them. This coming, though, when we thought maybe there potentially would be some more talks, leading into this question from Ashley saying, is there a possibility of a peaceful solution to all of this, or is it too late?
There's a peaceful solution as soon as the Iranian regime declares its surrender and waves a white flag. I think, you know, looking at this question in historical context, it's important to remember that for the last 25 years, basically since the awareness that Iran had this clandestine nuclear program, since that was exposed, and we're going back to 2003 with that, there have been successive attempts to use diplomacy and persuasion to bring about a peaceful solution. Everyone might remember that 10 years ago, we actually signed a nuclear deal with Iran that allowed them to continue enriching uranium. Many people at that time, including myself, were very critical of that deal. And of course, that deal unraveled. President Trump, back in, I think it was 2018, decided that it was not a good deal and pulled the US out. But it had already been unraveling before that time, because Iran was never really willing to cooperate with its own commitments under that deal, and particularly by allowing international inspectors into its nuclear facilities to ensure that everything was as it was supposed to be. That never happened. And so I think because Iran has rejected time after time every effort to make a peaceful solution workable, by cooperating, I think that's how we got to this point. So I think, yes, it certainly looks as though this war will continue. President Trump talking, 4 to 5 weeks. The defense secretary talking today about, it'll take, essentially saying it'll take as long as it takes. So I think we are now past the point of any kind of peaceful solution as long as this regime remains in power.
Going off of what you just said, what we heard from President Trump, they're expecting this to last quite a bit of time. There is concern over the weapons that Iran does have. This question from Scott saying, can we expect Iran to run out of rockets or drones anytime soon?
I think we can. I mean, again, a lot of the statistics, war always produces this rush of information. So I want to just stress that a lot of these statistics, in my view, are tentative. But I have seen some reports that Iran was down to 2,500 missiles. And if you look at the fact that the number of attacks daily since the war started, we're talking 3 figures. It won't take a long time for that supply of missiles to run down. I think the other interesting thing that I saw today is that, in fact, while Israel has been hit pretty heavily over the last 3 days, on each day of this war, the number of missiles hitting Israel has gone down. Now, I think the Iranians would like us to think that they have some secret weapon up their sleeves. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has warned a few times over the last 72 hours, get ready because we're about to unleash something big. And so far that hasn't happened. And I think if you look at a combination of factors, the fact that we went to war last June for 12 days. Not only did we do significant damage to the nuclear facilities at that time, we also attacked a lot of the ballistic missile batteries, and we attacked many of the Iranian military and police and repression facilities. So they were already very bruised coming into this war. And what we're seeing now, particularly today, is the Israeli Air Force striking in Tehran at the institutions of repression, the Basij paramilitary, which has engaged in a reign of terror against Iran's citizens. That's just one of many repression targets that the Americans and the Israelis have zoomed in on today.
I wanted to circle back to Hezbollah because one of those things we have learned today here is Israel saying it has killed the head of Hezbollah's intelligence unit. From an intelligence perspective, how significant is that loss for Hezbollah?
I think it's extremely significant. And I think it comes off the back of 2 years of Hezbollah being absolutely pummeled. Back in 2024, Israel succeeded in taking out probably the most charismatic of the leaders of Iran's terror proxies, Hassan Nasrallah, the chief of Hezbollah. His replacement, Naim Qassem, doesn't really have the same kind of clout and credibility that Nasrallah does. So Hezbollah has already been weakened in terms of the fact that Israel keeps culling its leaders. And again, your viewers might remember that also in 2024, Israel unleashed this kind of spectacular operation whereby pages that were being carried by Hezbollah operatives exploded in their pockets, and they were able to essentially neutralize thousands of Hezbollah fighters through that method. That doesn't mean that the Hezbollah threat is over. The fact that Israel is having to respond to this today is proof of that. They still do have a significant number of missiles, but I don't think they are really any match for the IDF. And that is why, Christy, I think that the Lebanese government is extremely nervous, and the Lebanese government is trying to rein in Hezbollah because they don't want to risk, an escalation in Israeli attacks on their territory.
And Ben, if we circle back to the viewer questions here, I do want to preface this one by saying we did hear from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth on this a little bit earlier today, and we'll be playing those comments out for our viewers here in just a short amount of time. But the question posed to you is there a chance the United States ends up with boots on the ground in Iran?
I think there is a chance of that, but I think it's very remote right now. I know that the president said earlier that he wasn't willing to rule that out. I think that would take this operation into very different territory in terms of our domestic politics here. There is understandably a lot of reticence and a lot of caution among Americans, remembering the wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan and the casualties that US servicemen and women sustained there. There's an understandable fear of that being repeated. I think, however, the difference between Iran and those situations is that in Iran, you have a very sizable body of the population that is well disposed to the United States. You know, it was very striking to me on Saturday, just minutes after the news came out that Khamenei had been eliminated, you saw Iranians in Tehran and several other cities rushing into the streets, cheering, honking car horns. I can't remember a war where I've seen the citizens of the country being targeted coming out to cheer the enemy's bombs. So I think that if foreign troops were to go, American or others, were to be deployed in Iran, they might find that they're in a much more benign environment as compared with Afghanistan and Iraq. But equally, I think there would be risks there. There would be revanchist elements of the regime that would probably try to fight guerrilla warfare. There are still, you know, significant numbers of Iranian citizens who are loyal to the Islamic Republic. So it's certainly not risk-free. And that's why I think military planners will really see that, Christy, as a last resort, putting boots on the ground.
And when we talk about this on a more global scale, we've been hearing from world leaders, one of them being British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, is sharing this post here as he said, "We are working with our longstanding friends and allies in collective self-defense. That's how we protect British interests and British lives." We also do know Starmer says he's giving U.S. permission to use UK bases for these Iran missions. But this question here coming from one of our viewers, are other countries going to join the U.S. in taking out the regime? And if so, how would that look?
Well, I think other countries already have joined the US. I mean, Israel is playing a major part in this operation. And again, you know, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, countries whom just last week it would have seemed outlandish to believe that they would fight against Iran. You know, President Trump, again, was saying in his interview earlier that they are apparently clamoring to join the fight. And I think now that they have sustained casualties, fatalities, their infrastructure has been attacked, I think they've really seen the Iranian regime up close and personal. So I do think that there is already this coalition assembled in the Middle East, with Israel as the primary member, but more and more you're seeing the Arab states becoming involved. I think more broadly, I'm not seeing any indications yet that European countries are willing to join. But I do, you know, you were talking about Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister. I have seen a shift in the British position. I mean, when this operation launched, the British would get kind of cold-shouldered it and said, look, we're not really going to participate. And I think as they've seen the momentum of this operation increase and the determination of the Americans and the Israelis to see this through, they've been forced to shift.
Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to answer all these viewer questions. And thank you to our viewers at home for writing them in. Before I let you go here, is there anything else you want to add about any of this? As I've been sharing, this has just been consistently new information coming in here. I was on air Saturday when this news broke, and up until now, we have just been getting so much information in. Is there anything about any of what we've learned in the past 24 hours that I may have missed that you'd like to touch on?
I think what I'd like to emphasize, Christy, is that it's understandable that people are nervous about war and worried about war and want a peaceful solution. And I think it's important to remember that the effort was made to get a peaceful solution. In Geneva last week, the US put 4 issues on the table: the nuclear program, the ballistic missiles program, the support for the repressive institutions, the machinery of repression in Iran that killed over 30,000 demonstrators in January, and Iran's support for the terrorist proxies we discussed: Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the Shia militias in Iraq. And Iran has not conceded on any one of those points. And I think, again, if people are questioning the logic for this war, then they need to go back a step and ask themselves, what did Iran do? What did the Iranian regime do to stave off this attack? And I think the answer is very little.
All right. Ben Cohen with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Always appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Christy.
And let's take you out live to Capitol Hill, because I do want to quickly recap. Back here in the U.S. Congress is about to launch a war powers debate over President Trump's authority to bomb Iran under largely unusual circumstances, which is that he has already done it, and the country is essentially already at war. At least 4 U.S. military personnel have been killed, and President Trump has warned that there will likely be more. And this moment is a defining one for Congress, which alone has the authority under the U.S. Constitution to declare war. In the United States, the Congress would need to affirmatively approve wartime operations with a declaration of war or with an authorization for the use of military force to essentially approve of the actions. But this rarely happens. In fact, Congress has declared war just 5 times in the nation's history, most recently back in 1941 to enter World War II, a day after the Pearl Harbor attack. But Congress also created the War Powers Resolution during the Vietnam War era as something of a tool of last resort. Both the House and Senate have prepared war powers resolutions for votes this week. White House officials are scheduled to brief congressional leaders and lawmakers this week as well, but the question and answer sessions will be behind closed doors. Stepping away now for a 2-minute commercial break on Live Now from Fox. You heard me mention that Secretary of War Pete Hegseth held a press conference earlier this morning. Coming up after the break, we are going to be checking in with our own Bowen Kadrowitz, as he is going to be breaking down for us what the Secretary of War said in that press conference, and we'll be playing it out for you here on Live Now from Fox as well, in case you missed it. Stay with us at 3:22 on the East Coast, 12:22 on the West Coast. We'll be right back.